YouTubers, this is another video from your friendly neighborhood reviewer, Evelyn. Today we're going to review another K-drama series that just came out on the 10th of August. It's called If You Wish Upon Me. It's starring Ji Jan-wook, if you remember him from The Sound of Music, Song Do-il, which I've seen this guy in different roles like in Cursed and It's Okay That's Love, and also Cho Soo-young, which I'm not that familiar with the actress. I think she did in that other series of If I Married an Anti-Fan. So I'll be reviewing episode 1 and maybe a little bit of episode 2. So with episode 1, it starts with the character of Young Gyo-ri, played by Ji Jan-wook, who's recently released from prison. But then again, we see him ask another released prisoner for their clothes for exchange for money. And then as the other prisoner is walking down, we see the gang members go and assume that this prisoner is Young Gyo-ri, in which they talk with him and realize it's not him. So we assume already that Young Gyo-ri is like former gang member, like former gang is chasing him. For what reason, we do not know. So Young Gyo-ri goes to the vet to pick up his dog, which he names Sunny, Adril. And we find out that the vet used to be in the same orphanage as Young Gyo-ri. So we can start to see, that the main character, Ji Jan-wook's character is, an orphan. Like bouncing from one place to another place, going to prison, being in a gang. And we see that Ji Jan-wook's appearance matches that of what you think of, a gang member. Young Gyo-ri goes and asks his childhood friend for the bag, in which we see that in the bag there was a false compartment which has a boatload of money. And we see that the vet has good morals as he didn't open up the bag. So he even wanted to give his, childhood friend some money, but the vet took what he found appropriate and gave the rest back to Young Gyo-ri. So as we see that Young Gyo-ri has nobody apart from his dog, and even worse, he finds out from his childhood friend the dog is terminally ill, we assume with cancer, and in pain. And then of course his childhood friend advises Young Gyo-ri to put down the dog, to put him out of his misery. But however, Young Gyo-ri can't bear the thought of that because his dog is his only family, as he belovedly calls his dog Son, or Sunny. So he goes off with his dog to a fancy hotel, and we can get the idea that Young Gyo-ri is on the run from the former gang, and we can start to get the sense that Young Gyo-ri has nothing else to really live for. So he goes into a fancy hotel, spending his money. We can see that people are looking at him weird because he looks to be like a delinquent. So Young Gyo-ri goes and buys a flashy car, and he decides he wants to go to the beach with his dog, which we have no idea at that point why, but he has to escape from the hotel as his former gang has found him in the hotel. So he goes on the run, he goes in the car, and there's like a kind of like a high-speed chase, not high-speed chase, but him driving really quickly. And this is the point in which the hospice angle comes into it, because this show is inspired by the Make-A-Wish Foundation in Netherlands, like what they do in fulfilling the terminally ill people's last request, before passing on, as you may know about Make-A-Wish. So this show is like inspired by that, because there's the hospice, which we see, they have a volunteer team, all volunteers called Team Genie, aka Aladdin Genie. And we have the main guy of Song Do-il playing Kang Tae-sik. He's the main guy, the volunteer, and he's there transporting a terminally ill patient to have his last request, which I believe was to die peacefully next to the grave of his wife. So they're transporting him, and conveniently the grave is next to a beach. So as they're driving as the ambulance was driving in the highway, and Young Gyo-ri is there in the red sports car, he inadvertently causes the ambulance to swerve off. And at the same time, the gang, to avoid any more issues, they disappear. But Kang Tae-sik, we see that, he's having none of it. So he forces Young Gyo-ri to drive the ambulance to the beach, which Young Gyo-ri goes and says, okay, to run away from the gang. He leaves the car there. So they go to the beach, and the elderly guy that they have transporting that's terminally ill, they manage to place him by the grave next to his wife, and he manages to pass on. Because they have, inferences of when the guy dying, seeing his wife there, let's say afterlife, joining his wife. But at the same time, we see that Yonguri is there with his dog. They're finally at the beach, and then he looks at his dog and he knows his dog is ill. But at the same time, he decides he has nothing else to live for, really. He's on the run from his gang, and he's finding his life basically pointless. So he decides to go with his dog Sunny, and to both of them to drown in the sea. So as he's walking towards the water, he feels the cold wave of the water hit on his ankles as he's wearing a full suit and the shoes. And then we get a flashback as to him being with this other young woman alone. We can assume this other woman maybe is like another orphan girl, both of them childhood friends. And the girl decides that they were going to both die together, commit suicide, and she ends up setting the room afire. Obviously we know that Yonguri survives. The only thing we know that Yonguri was going to take his dog and the money and maybe even the girl leave, but the girl goes and tells him that people like them should be, better off dying. In which he ends the flashback, and then he takes a second step to start to go into the sea. But Khan Tasik, the main volunteer guy, stops him. And in that moment, there's that brief look between each other. He knows that the guy was going to kill himself, but stops him. And Yonguri is there like scared, really scared. He's there shocked that somebody stopped him. And Khan Tasik goes and changes the conversation to make, Yonguri think that he went and caused an accident and not to wash himself of the issue by checking out. So we move forward to Khan Tasik goes to the police station with Yonguri, and obviously both of them are talking about their statements, and Khan Tasik gets told by the police guy, well, even though you're a victim, you shouldn't have not left the place. Khan Tasik apologizes, but then we get a backstory of Yonguri from the police officer. He tells him on the ID card, is this the place where you live? And Yonguri goes and says, I have no house, I'm homeless. And the police guy doesn't accept that, which is, okay, fair enough. And then the police guy goes and looks up Yonguri's rap sheet, and and we see he has a long list for scamming, stealing, and then they talk about the arson, which we saw in the flashback, but Yonguri's like, that wasn't my fault, somebody else did it, but they blamed me anyway. And in that moment, Khan Tasik sees on the back of Yonguri's, neck that there is apparently a burn mark, like an iron mark, maybe with iron clothes. And then we get like a cold realization from Khan Tasik, I hope I'm pronouncing these names right, and which the connection between both of them, we don't know. I'm assuming some things, but I won't get ahead. And Khan Tasik goes and asks Yonguri about the burn mark, and then in an urgent way, but Yonguri goes and shoves him off. Then we get more towards the end of the episode where Yonguri is in court with his lawyer, and they're fining him for the accident, but he doesn't want to pay. And then they say, well, volunteer work. And Yonguri gets out from the courtroom, but Khan Tasik goes and tells the judge that he would like Yonguri to volunteer his community service at the hospice as a driver, unbeknownst to Yonguri. I'm determined to pronounce these names right. And then when Yonguri goes and gets a text message saying that he's going to volunteer as a driver at a hospice, and he has no idea what a hospice is, so he looks it up, and then he finds out the hospice is where they give palliative care to terminally ill patients. And then we get the part to episode 2, in which we have the second case of another elderly gentleman that's terminally ill, and his last wish is basically he wants to die in his old house. But Yonguri, now Khan Tasik, now meeting all the other staff members, while driving to the hospice, he inadvertently crashes into Cho So-young, who she plays a nurse of So Young-ju, in which we see that So Young-ju has a fiery attitude because for every reason, Yonguri goes and almost runs over her and another woman that she was with, and in retaliation she goes and kicks in the car side window of Yonguri, which leads to kind of like a bickering argument. So we can kind of see the fiery attitude there. So as Yonguri is helping Khan Tasik with the challenge of getting this new family that's about to move out from this terminally ill guy's old house, they managed to convince him. And as and then transporting this elderly gentleman. This elderly actor, I've seen him in other shows, transporting back to the house. Yeonguri goes and starts driving the ambulance, and Yeonguri's bickering with Kang Tae-sik about his driving, and Yeonguri goes and says, a really kind of cold remark with, what's the point of being careful if he's going to die anyway, which triggers Kang Tae-sik to tell Yeonguri to, or Gorishi to stop the ambulance, and then they have a confrontation, and Kang Tae-sik goes and tells him, do you have anybody to mourn for you after when you die? And then Yeonguri goes and tells him, well, you're the one that stopped me from drowning, so what right have you got to talk about my own life? In that moment, Kang Tae-sik goes and realizes that he had every right to say it. He had every right, but then again, he has to realize that he's dealing with a vulnerable individual that's had a troubled life, and we can tell that he's depressed. Well, anybody be depressed in, Yeonguri's situation about having nothing basically, and people after him. So they managed to transport the guy to the place, and as Yeonguri is there sitting with the old guy, as they've already turned in for a shift, as they're taking turns, each one of them, to sit in with the guy during the day in the apartment, Yeonguri goes and asks the old man the question if he feels afraid about dying. The old man doesn't say anything, and Yeonguri goes and says, well, he was afraid when he was about to check out, kill himself, but he's even more scared about living. In that moment, So Youngju goes and hears the conversation, the nurse, and she gets a little bit more insight into Yeonguri, and she's starting to maybe put together the pieces that he's very vulnerable at the moment. And the old guy goes and gives Yeonguri a touch of humanity, and he thanks him for driving him all the way to his old house to spend his remaining time so he can pass away. And that touches Yeonguri, and he's on the verge of tears, and he tells the old guy his name, and he says, if you need anything, just tell me and I'll do it for you. And then we see that Yeonguri heard that the old guy had the tree there full of persimmons, like the red tomato looking thing. And then at night time, Yeonguri decides to make little persimmon models out of, I think, wood, God knows, and sticks them out in a tree. And the old man wakes up to find the tree full of, persimmons. And that's essentially the end of episode 2. But then again, at the end of episode 2, it's he's bringing back all the old guy's stuff to the apartment, and then we get a little cliffhanger in which his dog ends up going to this second floor when he's looking for his dog, and there's a door with a key padlock and with no name, and then Kang Tae-sik is there, and what I believe they're giving him a room. Kang Tae-sik sees that Yeonguri is, he has a nice heart, but he needs, and he knows that Yeonguri has nowhere to stay. So I reckon that they're giving him a room, and they're just scaring him that there's something forbidden in there. Well, anyway, that's essentially episode 1 and 2. I feel like this series is gonna be a real tearjerker, stringing on anybody's heart about, circumstances that force people to feel hopeless and depressed. And this series will show us that sometimes giving and helping can refill us up with positive energy and have hope again in humanity. Well, anyway, YouTubers, this is the end of the video. If you made it at the end, a big thank you. And to any new viewers, I really appreciate it if you give a like, subscribe, and share. Let's keep the channel growing. So as I leave you always, bye.